right, welcome everyone. I have a great guest on the show today, Andrew Codd. We met, I want to say 3 or 4-ish years ago, somewhere in that time frame. And I had the
Definitely.
pleasure of being on his podcast, Strength in the Numbers, which we'll talk about. But Andrew has a very diverse background. And I think part of the reason that we met was we kind of operate in the same general area in terms of topics. We work with finance and accounting professionals. Andrew is in Ireland. I'm in the United States. So we're different in that sense. But we've got some things in common and then some complementary things. So your background is so diverse. I thought it would be best if maybe you gave our audience just a little bit of your background, who you are, what you do, and who are the people that you serve.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction there, John. I suppose what I'm doing now, let's work from there. I'm the president of a company called Finetics. It's a company I set up with a few partners, which essentially provides finance teams with productivity software. A bit like the Salesforce.com for finance, bit of an ambitious goal for us, given it's a new startup. But after a long 20 plus years in the corporate world, it was just, I felt an appropriate time to strike out and put a lot of the toolkits we'd built up over the years into practice, given there was so much change going on in finance and accounting as well, for that matter. So a lot of our clients and customers would be sort of mid to large size enterprises, and so far it's gone better than I expected, thanks to the network effect, I guess, of having a podcast that's listened to in 170 plus countries around the world, and all those events done over the years, sharing our learnings, what was working and what wasn't in finance and accounting. And it gives me, and a big thing that's driving me on at the moment, John, is around the engagement side of things. We have a lot of clients that come out to us and ask if we can help them with their team engagement and so on, which is a fair shame, because I think when you work in the accounting and finance departments of large organizations, and it doesn't have to be like a big organization, even small organizations. I was just quickly on LinkedIn before our conversation, and I just saw one of our smaller, I would say, partner companies that I would have talked to just ad hoc. They won one of those EY Entrepreneur of the Year award.
It's a big deal.
And that was, and I remember the conversations with the finance director or the CFO of that organization at the time, and it was just like it's amazing the impact that finance can make on small manufacturing operations. It's just I said, we can make so much impact out there to the performance, success, sustainability of an operation, that we shouldn't feel ever disengaged in our work. So it just doesn't. It's one of those things that doesn't make sense, and I constantly feel like I'm trying to bring sense to this area. So hence Finetics, and the reason why we set that up was finance, obviously, for the finance part of Finetics, and the other part of it, some cybernetics, is these feedback loops. It's feeding back in what's working, try and do more of that, discover what's maybe not working as well or a bit more challenging, and try and figure out if we want to do something with that or not, and sort of share that around. And also we've got a few modules in our software which allows team members to engage more in their work, have the stakeholder engagement, and the stakeholders actually acknowledging the impact that finance and accounting teams are making in their organizations and to their performance. So I think one of my favorite expressions is what gets measured gets managed. I think it was from Peter Drucker, one of my favorite writers. A classic, right? And that's the irony, I think, with a lot of these challenges. It's like, for me, sometimes it's so obvious, is how often do we as professionals in accounting or finance, FP&A, wherever, how often do we actually measure our own performance, what really matters, so we can manage it and talk about it and bring it to the attention? Or is it because, and people say, yeah, that's a lovely luxury in this world we live in of rapid change and transformation, as we've already said. So things are constantly evolving, and they completely are. But if it's a difference between having an engaged finance team all rowing in the right direction or rowing off in different directions, I know what I would have. And I think it's just doing the basics well and measuring ourselves rather than constantly measuring the rest of the business, maybe take some of our own medicine. So that's what I've sort of settled on there, John, after, I said, a career 20 years in finance. And I probably would say before I even started in finance and became an accountant, a chartered accountant, I was in sales, because that's what my family used to work in. I used to spend my summers and weekends with my uncles and my dad on the road, selling various different things. Sometimes it was selling bread, sometimes it was selling vegetables. Um, sometimes we go to what we call car boot sales. I don't know what they call them in the States. These markets where people pull up in cars and they open the boot or the trunk, and they just open and they go sell whatever's in the back of the car.
Oh, yeah, I guess the closest thing to that here we would call a flea market.
Flea market. I didn't want to say, I didn't want to assume it, but yeah, that was sort of my head. So
Yeah.
so very comfortable about being in front of people, even though I'm actually quite introverted. And I've always felt there was
Who
I
would have
actually
known?
much prefer, yeah, but exactly, and I would have I suppose, but I suppose I've always been able to flick between the two.
Yeah,
Because
same
it
here.
was all because if you need to drive results, you're not going to do that sitting at a desk. You're going to have to get out there,
Yeah.
even if it does feel a little uncomfortable or unnatural. But actually, just getting out there and engaging with people is actually a really good feeling. It does sometimes, it can suck your energy if you're doing it too much, but I think it's just being tuned into those things. But I felt sales was a very hard job, and it was much easier. I much prefer supporting people be successful as opposed
Mm.
to being the one having to drive the success. So that's where finance and accounting resonated with me, because I love numbers, love deconstructing businesses, and then the whole leadership side of things. For me, I actually felt as a leader, I don't feel as much pressure. The pressure in terms of having to drive the business. It's creating an environment for others to be successful. But that, and I suppose a smaller startup now that I'm in now, that is a bit tougher because, yeah, I have to say I feel like I'm having to drive a lot more to get momentum. But now that we're sort of through the teething pieces and we've got some clients and we're making some good revenue and so on, that it's a bit easier nowadays to get back into that mode of leading as opposed to having to doing all the time. So it's been an interesting journey, but that's where we're at the moment.
So hearing about your sales background, to me, connecting the dots makes a little more sense now, right? Because I get questions all the time. I do training with accounting and finance folks predominantly in the areas of communication skills. So I get the question all the time. You stand up in front of groups of people and talk and teach and train people, but you say when you're talking that you're an introvert. They have trouble reconciling those. And same thing as you mentioned, I am naturally more introverted, but I saw over time throughout my career, I would see people who were more assertive getting opportunities that I felt like I could take advantage of if I were able to just speak up and be more assertive. So I just learned to become more situationally extroverted, and it made a world of difference.
I love that expression, actually. Yeah, that's situationally. How did how did the penny drop for you though? Because I think I fell into it by accident. It wasn't certainly deliberate. Because I really love that expression. I'm going to steal that now, actually, John, going forward.
Have
But
at it. I'm sure
so
I stole it.
so when did the penny drop for you on that one? How did that come about?
I think probably if I was going to identify one moment, and I think it was probably not one single moment, but the one
Oh
that
yeah.
sticks out the most. I was working as a manager of corporate development for AutoNation, think CarMax. So back then, I worked there in the early days of AutoNation. As a manager, my desk was in a hallway outside of the vice chairman's office. Then we moved it to a beautiful new office and all that. But I was working in a division that was responsible for building out these used car mega centers, kind of like CarMax is today.
Yeah.
And so every day, my main responsibility was a 5-year strategic plan and financial forecasting model. And so daily, I would go out and I would meet with people in different departments to update the assumptions. And one day I was out at a happy hour that somebody had invited me to. It was just a bunch of people from the company. And I was talking to someone for another department who I didn't really know very well. And after we'd all had a few drinks, everyone gets a little relaxed, and I said something and they laughed, and they made the comment, gee, you seem like a nice guy. And they said it like it was surprising. And I said, why do you say it like that's a surprise? They said, well, we've passed you in the hallway and said hello several times and you never responded. We weren't going to say anything, but since you asked, we kind of thought you were, could bleep this out, an a-hole. And
Wow.
I was shocked because
Yeah.
I've always considered myself a people person. And I've always kind of really been irked by people who did what I was doing. So I immediately changed the subject and tried to, make light of it. So the next day I asked a couple of guys at work, I said, I don't do that, do I? And they were like, yeah, you do it all the time.
Yeah.
And I realized what was happening was, for me, that was a very stressful job. And when I was walking down the hall and those people said hello and I ignored them, I was almost always looking at some document that we were going to discuss in the meeting I was going to. And it was usually a document I produced, and I was sweating bullets. Is there something that do I have an error? Am I going to be
Oh
able to
God.
answer all that?
Yes.
I was just stressed out all the time, right?
Completely relate to that. Yeah.
So I started getting into self-improvement. I just was like, I got to fix this. This is not good.
Yep.
So then about a year later, they shut down the entire division that I worked in. I got laid off with 400 some other people. Luckily, they hired me back as a consultant, but I realized very quickly, now I work for myself. And without realizing it, I got into sales. Because if you can't sell and bring in a client, you're out of business.
Yeah.
So I started really working on myself. And in, I think it was 2011 or 2013, someone asked me to speak at a conference. It was a budget and forecast conference. And I thought, well, how does this work? And so we went back and forth, and I said, okay, I'll do it. And I did it. And I was terrified to do it, but it
Yes.
went well. They asked me back to do another one. I did about a half dozen for them that year. And then I realized I kind of like this. What if I actually was proactive and went out and looked for business to do this?
Oh my
And
goodness.
between then and
Yeah.
today, I transitioned from doing 100% consulting work, finance consulting work, and just a smidgen of speaking and training, to now I only do speaking and training unless, I jokingly say, unless you kick the door in and throw a bag of money at me to do consulting work, this is all I do.
Yeah.
So
It's funny that's I sort of how do you say, I can certainly relate to your story, particularly that sort of always sort of worrying about the numbers and these sort of things, and not maybe be appreciating the full situation that's going on around the situational awareness. And that's what I was sort of thinking about where the idea for the phonetic software came from, was that because I think finance is so busy focused on finance stuff, sometimes we're guilty of not asking our stakeholders or even our team members, particularly for finance leaders, what is the situation? What's going on, not just within their careers, but outside. And I know that sounds all fluffy, but that's sort of the expectation nowadays. And then having an operating system or a playbook that you gain from the consulting experience, from all the trials and tribulations, that, well, actually, here's the playbook. You can operate. I mean, finance is not really rocket science. These are just the things you need to be doing with your stakeholders, making sure we're delivering the right outcomes that are valuable. And that way you sort of tick the major boxes for people, and whether it's delivering to an audience at a speaking event, which, by the way, John, I don't do them as much now because I'm fairly selfish on my time, trying to grow the business and drive it forward.
Yeah.
But I would say that I still get a little terrified when I'm presenting. But what keeps me going is the conversations afterward. I look beyond the initial presentation piece that goes in a bit of a blur. And I do get great energy from it, particularly where I'm facilitating, because I feel very uncomfortable being an expert. I may have written a best-selling book, but I wouldn't perceive myself ever as an expert on certain things. And so I like facilitating conversations much more. So I get much better energy out of that. But I do enjoy the bit afterward. That's what I look beyond the situation to the after it, which is the conversations you have with people. Like, what insights did you get from that, or what resonated with you most, or how are you going to take that away and put it into practice, or if there was any gaps, did we miss something there that you'd like us to talk about? I love seeing beyond the situations, and then so I'm looking forward to get to that. So I probably don't enjoy, or maybe it's a case of I distract myself from being terrified during the event, so afterwards I can enjoy it more. Maybe that's how I get through it. But yeah, I still, but I'd be worried if I wasn't feeling a little nervous or a bit terrified before these things.
I've heard,
Because then I probably wouldn't be taking them as seriously, if that makes sense.
yeah, that's exactly what I've heard from some of the most successful speakers, is that they say it means you care. if
Yeah,
you're
yes,
if you're at
yes.
least a little nervous. Maybe it gets dialed back from terrified to nervous or excited, or maybe they put a different word on it as they get more experience. But at the end
Yeah,
of the day, your energy level spikes if you're really invested and you really care about it. You use the
yeah,
word that really resonates with me, and I add one to describe myself. I don't like the idea of being referred to as an expert either. Um, I've come to realize in the last couple of years that my value is more as a curator and a facilitator.
yeah, yeah.
So helping people, you take all these different books that I've read and courses that I've taken and experiences that I've had, the more diverse, I think I have a diversity of experience that I can curate different things from that can add value in any particular situation that maybe is just different from what that person has in their experience. And it's not necessarily from being the world's best at one thing. It's an ability, I think, to be able to quickly connect dots and say,
Yes.
okay, I'm hearing you say you have a problem with this. I have all this experience over here. I'm going to take a little from here, a little from here, and a little from
That's
here. And together, I think we can help craft a solution to your problem.
yeah. No, I'm not trying to put you or anyone else out in finance out of business, John. But what if you could do that, connecting the dots, all those little bits faster, enabled
I'm
by something
guessing
like
that's
a
what your
software?
software does. Yeah.
So essentially, so that's what it does. Yeah, the bit where we're challenged with at the moment that we're overcoming is in the early days when we started it, it was very much human-led identification of the opportunities. Now it's trying to train algorithms to spot them faster than we can. So it's still connecting dots and identifying patterns of what's working well and what could be better, what the trends are, and so on. Um, and you know what? It's nice to use software for that because our brains can only hold so much, which is why I like your idea of the curators, because behind the scenes, that's why I loved doing the podcast actually, was yes, it was great doing the conversations and vicariously learning from people, so much new input all the time. And then putting it out there and then hearing the conversations that were going on afterwards and getting the feedback from the audience about, what they liked and so on, and other guests that they wanted on. But then what I really enjoyed the most was behind the scenes is connecting the people with each other, whether it was someone had listened in and wanted to connect with someone who was on the show or one of the speakers on the show,
Yep.
or actually connecting the podcast speakers together. And actually our biggest client at the moment came from someone who was on the podcast, even though it wasn't set up way as a business generation activity.
Right.
When they'd heard I'd left the corporate world, they said, just we want you to come, consult with us and do a few things with us. And I said, well, I'm not really sort of looking to work for anyone anymore. We're trying to drive the software. Bring the software with you. It's like, okay, fine.
Makes sense, right?
And connecting the dots. So this is the thing about the creating and sharing is you get a really interesting body of connections, of people, of ideas, sources of information that you can tap into. So whether it's a software or whether it's a machine network or human network, I think networks are super important for the audience listening in today and watching in. Definitely I think the ability to create, and that's why I find particularly functions like FP&A very important, John, because of their visibility across their organizations. They've access to data, access to decision
Yeah.
makers. With the right training, which a lot of people FBA have, they can start connecting dots in ways that matter to support decisions.
Yep.
And the cool thing about having a sort of a financy or accounting type badge is we're perceived as independent, apolitical, bipartisan. We're not for any one particular function. We're there for the business, to represent the business. So we tend to get a lot of people's ears. So it's a tremendous platform to make a difference in our organizations. And again, comes back to like, how are I mean, if the statistics are to be believed, 70% or 7 out of 10 people in finance are not engaged in their work. Crazy.
Yeah, it's a scary number. With a couple of things came up for me while you were talking. One of them was the idea of connecting people. And that's something I need to get better at doing that, because I've been really fortunate. I've been almost shocked at some of the speakers that have said yes to be on the program. Just the wealth of knowledge and experience that some of them have. but it brought up something for me. I think I came up with this term. Maybe I heard it from someone else, and I don't remember, but it's SWOT on the fly. And it's what you were talking about. We all know about this thing called a SWOT analysis, right? Strengths,
Yes.
weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, right? But typically the context for that, in my experience, has been we sit down to do a 5-year strategic plan or an annual plan, and we go through this exercise where we do a SWOT analysis, right? And then we put this plan together and we put it in a binder, and it goes on a shelf, and it becomes what Jim
Yes.
Quick calls shelf help, right?
Oh,
And
love that.
nobody
Yeah,
ever
love
looks
that.
at it again.
Yeah.
And so my term SWOT on the fly, I came up with when I was talking to people about encouraging them, get out from behind your desk and get around in your organization.
Yeah.
Get some exposure to the operations of the business so that when you're looking at the numbers, you have a context in your head of what these numbers relate to. And I think I developed that from some great leaders at a couple of organizations I worked at that forced that on me. They said, hey,
Yeah.
Sanchez, get out from your desk and go talk to this person, this person, and this person. And then when they come and, for example, when I worked at Royal Caribbean Cruises, I handled all the capital appropriations requests. So when somebody came in and said, maybe they said, hey, we discovered this great new software, this phonetics software, and we want to implement it in our department. And this is how much it's going to cost, and here's why we want it. So I'd have to sit down with them and do an analysis and crunch the numbers and all that good stuff. That was such a fantastic experience for me because it forced me to learn about all these things that were outside of the numbers, but they were they were like the structure or the scaffolding underneath the numbers, that if you didn't understand, you didn't have a full understanding of the business.
Yes.
And then one other thing, and then I've got a question for you. Something you mentioned about connecting the dots also. One of my goals with the podcast, actually with all my content, but specifically with the podcast, is to tag different clips so that if I meet somebody and they say, we're having a problem with creating insights or developing data dashboards or whatever it is, make a mental note. And when I get back to my office, send them a clip. I already have the beginnings of this, a spreadsheet with different video and audio clips tagged with different categories to go. They asked about these 3 different things, and then grab those clips, send them a link to those clips and say, hey, you mentioned this. Here are a few clips that specifically talk about that. I hope they help. Now there's some work involved to get there, but that's a vision that I have.
Oh no, it's a great vision. In actual fact, it's much more organized than the vision I had for when we did our podcast to strengthen the numbers. My thing was just to have this go-to resource of people that had some ideas that worked in finance and accounting, that seemed across their careers to help them get enjoyment or have some fun in it. It was mostly finance and accounting. We had some people from other backgrounds. It was interesting. I actually had a link emailed to me from one of our previous guests on the show. If I could send it out, I actually ended up sending it to my wife on how to have a good day, because we actually had an author who wrote a book, How to Have a Good Day, and we called the episode How to Have a Good Day in Finance. So she was talking about things like massively researched stuff. Here we go. She might even be in that book.
Yeah. So you just led me to, that was a perfect segue, whether you realize it or not.
I didn't realize.
To a couple of things. I tagged a few things in your book. So if you don't have the Finance Mentors Ledger, you need to go out and get it. It's on Amazon. I'm sure it's probably on links on your website as well. We'll leave all this information in the show notes. This, by the way, was one of the best ideas I've ever seen, which is this entire book is basically content from your podcast.
Yeah.
What
I like the best content as well.
But it's a brilliant, I've never seen anything like that. It's a brilliant idea, but you mentioned something, you mentioned your wife, which brought up something for me that caught my attention quickly. It's in the front of the book, but it caught my attention not because it's in the front of the book. I have for the longest time been sort of in search of different mentors for different things. And you mentioned in the dedication to the book, to Katie, my soulmate and best mentor I've ever known.
Oh, yeah.
So
I can't believe
curious,
I said stuff like that.
I'm curious, tell me about how has she been the best mentor you've ever known?
Yeah, I suppose Oh goodness, yeah. I had a where do I start with that one? Because I think there's a lot to unpack
Wherever you
there.
want.
Yeah, uh, yeah. I suppose I suppose look, I had an interesting upbringing where I think my parents did the best they could do with their upbringings themselves. Yeah, I've not as much as I've tried to develop back to your phrase like the situational empathy or the situational awareness. I'm not naturally empathetic. I'm probably more machine-like in how I behave and operate, where Katie's completely different. And I could see she would be a great mother and partner from when we started getting to know each other. So she showed me the ways of how to be a better parent and other things as well that I probably wouldn't have had the best access to, and the amount of effort and patience she would have had to demonstrate with me was very much as a mentor. And I didn't even know she was being a mentor to me, because it wasn't until later in my career I figured out the importance of mentors. So for me, really, it was around things like how to be a better parent, how to how to approach people in a better way, because there was a big assumption in my head that everything I did was common sense. I mean, it was logical. Human beings aren't necessarily logical, and
We're not usually.
not usually, yeah. So it was just not usually, yeah. So it was like it was just she had a really good way of just pointing out what I did well and what I could do better, and she just always seemed to have an answer for everything. So I feel I've been very, very fortunate to have that person by my side, and just help encouraging me. And the way we sort of divided the roles in our family. Now the great thing is now is Katie's going. She's almost a fully qualified psychotherapist counselor,
Hmm.
and so she's gone back. So once the kids are fairly well raised at this stage, so they're pretty much looking after themselves. So she's following that ambition, which again she then attributes me to helping her on that path. I don't see how, but she's definitely how do you say, just a great role model, and someone who I'm just very lucky. I like to get to hang out with my best friend pretty much every day, and
That's
um,
so
and and
cool.
learn so much and gain from that mentorship. But I have, in parts, then with the great mentors I've had in my career, um, that sort of feeling you get when people show you the way to do something better, or if you hit an obstacle, a way around it. And I
Mhm.
was very slow to ask for help. Not in my nature, as the way I was brought up was feeling I could do pretty much everything myself, and then you end up wasting a lot of effort. And actually, I find it's much more rewarding to do stuff together with other people, as opposed to taking it on
Yeah.
all by yourself. I just wish I come to that lesson sooner. Even back to that, when you said earlier, John, about getting out from behind your desk, like it triggered in my head just the two examples. I was at a tech company, and I was just seriously coming up the stairs, and I just saw someone. I said, how have you been? I haven't seen you for a while. And that salesperson told me about an opportunity that or something that was causing him frustration, actually, in the sales process. I went away and looked at some numbers, crunched it with my team, and ended up implementing a program that generated an extra $100 million a year for that business,
Holy
just off
cow.
that one conversation. Then had another conversation with someone who was working late one night in the credit control department of all places, and said, just got talking, and he said, I know you're leading this services organization. Can you there's something I've seen going on. Do you mind just having a look at it with me? And I said, yeah, sure. What else are we doing here at like 7 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night? So he took me through it, and then I said, fine, I want my team to have a look at it. I think you're onto something here. I ended up hiring him actually into our organization, and that saved us about $50 million a year. That saving, because it turned out we were auto crediting customers when they cancel their contract, which we shouldn't have been doing because of the penalty clauses in the contracts itself. So again, it was just amazing. Just these random conversations were leading to value. Just the importance of getting out behind your desk and just being human with people and asking how things are going.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have been able to maybe uncover that side of myself if it hadn't been for Katie mentoring me on the importance of those things.
So you just reminded me of a piece of advice I got from one of my early mentors, Bill Flaherty. If you're watching this, you need to do this podcast. I've asked him to do the podcast, and he's stalling me. Is I think what he's
Oh,
doing,
right.
because he's just a very private guy, but great mentor. He told me something I've never forgotten, which is one of the biggest, most impactful decisions you'll ever make that will affect your entire life is who you choose to marry. That has
Wow.
stuck
I
with
wish I'd
me.
heard about that.
Yeah. Well, so that leads me to another question though. In this same book we're talking about, you mentioned that you met your first proper mentor, Vince,
Yes.
back in, and you told a little bit of a story about it. Could tell me a little bit about how did you meet Vince,
Oh man.
and how has he helped you as a mentor over the years?
Yeah, I mean, Vince probably doesn't realize this, but like, and this is the nuts thing. It was probably just I'd met him a few years previously, but it just didn't click the connection. He was a recruitment consultant. You might be able to tell by my accent, it's not completely Irish, but it's not, it's not completely English either. I've pretty much spent my career and life between Ireland and England,
Okay.
working in various different companies, also in other different countries as well. But the accent hasn't seemed to have shifted; it's just got stuck between the two. And Vince also happened to come from this part of the world I live in. It's West Cork, in Ireland, so this rocky Atlantic Ocean. So he was over sort of west of London himself, and I had left the job because I was explaining to actually one of my team this morning. I'd left the job because we needed to get a mortgage, because we were Katie and myself were getting married. We were going to buy a house together and all this sort of stuff, and I wasn't going to be able to get a mortgage on the salary I was at a place I really enjoyed working. So I had to move jobs. So I moved jobs, and it turned out to be a disastrous move. Really long hours. I didn't fit the culture. The company I went to was a pharmaceutical one. Let's say I don't trust pharmaceutical companies after that experience. It was really
Interesting.
shattered my ambitions. I was very idealistic as well, which probably made it feel a lot more of a painful, like a bad decision I'd made. Turned out to be the best decision, because I wouldn't have found my way to Vince, because what ended up happening was I needed to get out of there. So I just applied to loads of jobs, and I reckon Vince must have had about 3 or 4 completely different jobs advertised, and I applied for all of them. So it looked like I was a guy who had no idea what he was doing or where he was going, which is pretty much what he said to me. He goes, he phones me up and he goes, Andrew, hi Vince, I think we might have met before, blah, blah, blah. I said, look, I, I think it's interesting. You applied to a few of my jobs, but I don't have any job for you. But I think I've got some information that's really useful to share with you. So I think we should meet. And it's one of those moments, John, where I don't know if anyone like listening or watching has had similar, where sometimes you just realize in life someone knows something, more than you, and you just need to shut up and just say, yeah, okay, I will meet, let's meet. It's like there's no debate. So we met at the Holiday Inn up at one of we have these motorways, or we had these motorways over in England, similar like interstates. We just met off one of the laybys off one of them at a Holiday Inn in the lobby there, and we got a coffee together. And he showed me this. He called it a career bone diagram, and it's
Oh,
actually
what?
made its way. It's called a career bone diagram.
Okay.
Essentially, it's like 4 steps. I don't know why it's called that, but and by the way, I've shared this advice with others on the podcast, with people that have worked in finance organizations and so on, and it's embedded in our software. Actually, is one of the modules.
Interesting.
Funny enough, it's just we've got the software version of what was done on the back of a napkin. Literally, it was done on the back of a napkin what Vince did there, and so it's helped. I'd like to think tens of thousands of people, at least in finance and accounting, probably beyond, this framework. So Vince didn't just help one person that day; he helped tens of thousands in our community. And what he did, he said, okay, so the way the career bone diagram works, you start with the end in mind. Stephen Covey advice. So you go to there's 4 steps in the diagram. You go to the end step and you draw a big rectangle. And that's representing the top step of a staircase, and in there you write your ideal career outcomes. It was very career focused at the time. I've tweaked it since, but and I would use the expression as ideal. So ideal is an amalgamation of 2 words, idea and love, because if you've got because love is a powerful emotion, And if you've got an idea you love, you have an ideal, great emotion behind an idea gives you your ideal, and you will actually put a lot more effort, and there's a more likely chance of it transpiring. So I thought this is interesting. Let's see where this will go. So we projected 3 years out into the future, and I put in a bit of a wish list of a few things that I thought were ideals. Where like I wanted a 6-figure paying job. I was well off of that. I think I was like on about 40,000 a year, and I wanted 100,000. I wanted an MBA from a top university. Obviously, the house being purchased, a growing family, working in a sort of a finance director equivalent to a CFO role, working with investors in private equity and so on. So all of these sort of things I was listing out. So I had a very clear idea what the role was, who I was dealing with, that would be based in London, where would have been a lot of opportunity, a lot of stuff going on. So it was quite clear what I wanted. And then the next step was you go right down to the bottom of the ladder, draw a smaller rectangle, and leaving space for 2 other rectangles in between for the other steps, and then fill out all your assets. Where are you now? What are your strengths? What are your interests? What qualifications do you have? What experiences do you have? What's in your toolkit essentially so far? And then that's where the mentors come in. It's filling in the gaps between where you want to be, your ideal, and where you are now. And that's essentially was sort of one of the models that I ended up implementing, and then gaining mentors. So when Vince was the first mentor, I didn't go back to him. I sought out other mentors to help me understand what I needed to do to fill in the gaps from where I was to where I was going to get to. So the next thing I knew, I needed to get another job, ideally at or better paid than where I was, managerial role, so I could learn how to be a better leader. Because they're not going to pay 6 figures for people in finance who are just on their own. They're probably, and where I want to be was leading teams and so on. So you needed to get there. So that needed to be the next move. I stepped outside of finance into asset management. I applied to do an MBA because you needed to start then. We bought the house and so on. So there was a lot of things done. And then I didn't know what the next step was, but I was able to get a picture where I could articulate it to others to what I wanted. And then a private equity firm came in and bought the company I was at, and they really liked what I did. So so they put a good word in for me on one of the other assets they bought, and I did get the 6-figure job. I'd finished my MBA by that time as well.
Nice.
With a distinction. I got A's in everything except the B in marketing, which I'm still not very good at, but I'm pretty strong on other stuff. And then yeah, so everything transpired in that bone diagram, and it's just been a 3-year cycle since, and it just has got better, and we've achieved everything in it every single time. And as I said, I've turned it into a bit of a software now. But worst case scenario, anyone could do this on a napkin. Anyone listening in could do it on a napkin. The software just provides a bit of structure around it, and that's part of the phonetics. And I believe that helps with engagement in finance teams, because if people can see what they're doing is helping them in their careers, but it's also helping their teams and their companies, and their stakeholders are giving positive feedback on it, then that's quite a powerful, how do you say, a connection of dots and value.
Yeah.
That will see people be more successful in their careers, and hopefully reverse some of this trend we've had towards disengagement. And not just a disengagement, it's a very similar statistic for the number of stakeholders or business partners out there that look at their finance teams as being ineffective. I think it's like 67% of business partners, according to Gartner, view finance is ineffective. So I'm wondering if my belief is, and not that I've proven it, it's linked to the disengagement, because we shouldn't really be having too many disengaged people in finance, not with the potential that we have at our fingertips. So that career bone diagram, it's and Vince really sort of changed the course of my career and life, and family and so on, and it changed the course positively for a lot of other people. And it's been amazing, some of the stories I've heard what people have done with it. There's some people, I think it may be the younger generation, they have much shorter time frames. Mine was always 3 years. But for some people, they wanted everything to happen in a year or 18 months.
I was going to say it's probably measured in months instead of years.
Yeah. And we actually, there was a lady, very well qualified. She had much better starting point than me in terms of strengths and assets and so on. And she wanted in 18 months to get from where she was to like a six-figure role. So not a big a jump as I had to do, but nearly 2x from where she was. And she had no idea how it was going to happen, but we just started planting it out or whatever. And she nailed it. She nailed it well within the 18 months. So, you can have a dramatic change around in terms of finding the ideal type of career you want, but you have to engage, you have to drive value, you have to, it just doesn't happen. And this is what maybe comes back to what we were saying earlier, is like, if you're an introvert and you're going to sit behind your desk, it's not going to happen for you. You're going to go out and have to have conversations, connect, have mentors. I don't know how, and maybe that's why people who are sort of mentors or people who have been successful are quite happy to share the stories back, because there's no way I've got to where I've got to without others help along the way.
They know the value that they got from their mentor. So I'm sure that's a big piece of why they're so willing to be that mentor.
And that's why coming back to Vince is like, that's why I feel duty bound to share this, because I don't own this knowledge. I'm not trying to protect it or keep it secret. As I said, you don't need fancy software to go and do this. You can do this on a napkin. For years, we used to do this on a spreadsheet, which you believe typical finance. Whip out a spreadsheet with 4 columns and put in each bit in there.
So you've used that term ideal a bunch of times throughout what you just said, and I'd never heard anyone articulate it this way.
Oh, okay.
Idea plus love equals ideal.
Yeah,
it makes total sense. I've just never heard it articulated that way.
But I think it's funny, but like that just landed sometimes, John. I don't know where I got that from. Again, maybe it was something subconscious, I don't know, but the whole point of what I was trying to do there was just say, look, when you've got an idea and you put a strong emotion behind it, something that's really powerful, there's a much better chance it's going to be successful.
Oh, 100%. Tony
Robbins. That resonance.
Part of the reason, if you ever been to a Tony Robbins event? So if you walk
but I know the guy. I know the guy you mean, the guy with the huge hands.
Yeah. So if you walk into an event with him, I went to his signature Unleash the Power Within way back in like the late 90s. And I remember walking in, and I felt like I was walking into a nightclub. There's this upbeat dance music blasting and people jumping up and down, and there's people on the stage before he comes out, and they're exercising. And I'm thinking, what kind of woo-woo crap did I get myself into? And it wasn't very long before I was doing the same thing with the crowd. And I realized he talks about this all the time, that all learning is state dependent. If you come in there and you're down, you're low energy, and you're not excited, and there's all this great information coming your way, you're not going to be absorbing it. You're not going to remember it. So it makes total sense, though.
Well, but maybe that's part of like people's careers as well. Just now you're thinking out loud, actually, it's the learning, the state you're in for learning is super important. But same when it comes back to work, if people are excited or feel that there's a purpose behind the work they're doing, I think they'll put much more energy or engagement into it than perhaps not. And I think that's where sort of like the mentoring piece comes in as well, or just having a framework. Like, again, that was phonetics to me is like it's like an operating system. It's a playbook you can follow, but when you're enhancing a playbook with stuff that actually works practically in the real world, when I did my and that's probably the same for a lot of listeners out there who did any qualifications, whether it be an FP&A or chartered accountancy or whatever. Where did it in the handbook on becoming an accountant or the International Finance Accounting Standards or US GAAP, did it ever say get out from behind your desk, go and have conversations with people? It doesn't.
I never heard it. Yeah. Well, speaking of which, so I know both in your jobs as well as in the people you talk to in your podcast, you have worked with people from a lot of different countries, a lot of different cultures. I think in your book, actually, there were 8 people, and this book actually came out. I don't know what episode you were on in this book, but you've got a lot since this book came out. But even just when that book came out, you had already interviewed 8 people from Africa, 18 people from Asia and Australia that were in the book. And I'm curious, what are some of the observations that you've made about how cultural differences impact the way people communicate with each other and work with each other?
Oh, it's It's a good question, John. How would they impact? I'm very biased on this one. So maybe my bias might come across in this answer. I'm quite happy to take on the additional cost associated with communication costs. I break it down. I studied Austrian economics at university, as well as financial, but I really liked the Austrian because they talked through economics. Austrian economics is based on praxeology, the study of human action. So I'm quite happy to experience the dynamic transaction costs that come from having a more dispersed team across the world. I mean, when I finished up as a CFO in a multinational before embarking with Phonetics, I led a team across 4 continents, and I was a leader of leaders. So you've got multiple opportunities for communication to fall down between multiple gaps across teams and so on. And yes, it's probably easier to have everyone all in one office, to communicate and so on, same way of thinking and same cultural. But I'm quite happy to see what innovation gets sparked from those conversations with people from different countries. So we say maybe a person in Brazil talking with someone from Egypt, or someone from Malaysia talking with someone from, say, Slovakia, or someone from Ireland who maybe talking to someone from England, and Ireland and England had a bit of a fractious relationship for many years. So I was quite happy to see where that would go. And there was also a resilience element as well. If, for instance, like we had quite a big team in Cairo, actually. If a lot of them were out of the office because of, say, they were celebrating Eid like quite recently, or were fasting, that we had other people in the team who could pick up the slack. So I felt it helped improve teams' resilience. So what I'm saying is I probably look past some of the cultural things, John, because of my biases, because I felt that was a better way of establishing a team. And I also like the idea of hubs in various different locations, so people had good career paths to follow. If I was to peel back on the cultural one, and I'm not trying to slight anyone in maybe more economies that some might consider it as more developed, whatever developed means, maybe larger economies is probably the right way to term it, is I felt working with maybe people, say, in Egypt, they were hungrier to learn and engage than maybe someone of a similar age group, say, in Ireland. For instance, they reminded me of what the Irish were 20 years ago, type of thing. Very hungry, eager to learn, wanting to engage, wanting to do more, wanting more for themselves. Now, maybe again, they were the ones that we were talking with because I wanted to work with a multinational because they wanted to travel. They were ambitious. So maybe it was self-selection in that regard, and it's not typical of their entire culture. I do remember listening on as part of the MBA covering a cultural component. Gert Hofstede, I think from the Netherlands, he had a cultural scoring index, and
Interesting.
And the thing was, like, look, in finance we support a lot of decisions, and I was very mindful of groupthink. The whole Bay of Pigs thing stuck in my head. And when you've got people who have got different uncertainty avoidances, I'm very risk averse. It comes across in my investment portfolio as well as my decisions. I'm not much of a risk taker, although running a business and a startup and so on, and taking that leap, some might think it's risky leaving the safety of a corporate world where things were going brilliant. Might be a bit crazy for some. But very risky for some. But no, like for me, I'm very risk averse. So sometimes it's nice to surround yourself with people who are less risk averse, culturally speaking. And this is on cultural indicators. It's called the uncertainty avoidance dimension. Then you've got some people that are more individualistic cultures versus collectivistic. It was probably no accident. We had a good portion of our team in collectivistic countries. But then we had some that were individualistic, and I thought they worked very well together. I liked bouncing them up. I like sort of seeing what the reaction would be, and I was happy to pay the additional cost in terms of maybe time to do something. It took longer to get stuff to market, but maybe the quality was from a decision-making perspective, more well-rounded, and I was happy to play that trade-off. So my bias is coming across, but there were definitely cultural differences. I mean, and that was part of the fun as well. We had, one of the team building games we actually used to play. So the way we had a great guest on the show, Ashish. He was an Indian VP who used to run a similarly dispersed global team, and he said it was very important to get out there and meet the team and travel regularly. And I do agree with him as a leader. It's important to get out and experience culture and live it yourselves. I feel much better, as more rounded as a person, appreciating what it looks like in a Cairo or being to Slovakia. Bratislava is a lovely place. I would never have been there had it not been for the opportunity afforded to go meet the team, have their local foods, their cultures, particularly the local beers. I'm a big fan of trying beers from all around the world. And with some great beers here in Ireland as well. So, but it was just nice to have that appreciation. I feel like I grew as a person, and funny enough, I think that was one of the major advantages, and what a lot of people in the team liked is we used to have these monthly team buildings. So we'd have the regular weekly cadence of meetings, but every month we'd just have an hour and a half to ourselves just to play games as a team. And we had some amazing games. Some of the creativity of the team and the effort that they put into one time, right? They created this team building game where they created a quiz, where it was like you had to solve puzzles to go to the next step of the quiz, and it was like you landed in their country, and to get to the next part of the map, you had to. I don't know what they designed it on. Could have been MS Teams or something. I don't know, but it was absolutely amazing. Like they created an app where you had to solve a puzzle, and then you go to the next one, but you learned about their culture and solving the puzzle.
Oh, that's
and then
cool.
you made it to a game. Yeah, but the one cool one, and I recommend it for our audience because it's easier to access, is there was this website or app called GeoGuessr. I don't know if you heard of it, John.
GeoGuessr.
GeoGuessr, and I think it's GeoGuessr. I think that's what it is. It's missing the E, I think. But essentially, what it does, it throws up loads of pictures of different places in the world, and you have to guess where in the world it is on a map. And you get a score for how close you get to that place. So you might see a castle, and you think, oh, is that in the south of France, or is that over in North Africa? And then the team, you have to decide. So you'd group people up and you play games together. And then someone in the team might have been to that location, because when you're dispersed across the world, more than likely someone has probably been there. And we had someone who'd been to like some museums in Scandinavia. And I was just like, oh, right. And I didn't know this. They had loads of museums in Stockholm and Sweden. So that's on my list now, to go and travel to Sweden and go and visit museums there. And they rely a lot on water taxis. Now, I would never have that knowledge had it not been for just those social interactions with the different cultures and backgrounds in the team. And it's not just locations, it's the different ages as well. We had people across loads of different spectrums. It was really special. I really enjoyed it. And I think that rubbed off on the team as well, I think.
I found it fascinating. I visited Europe many years ago, and what you were talking about with the like water taxis.
Yeah.
There are places that I'd never realized. The Netherlands, which it's just my personal opinion.
Yeah.
I think Americans, we're relatively ignorant to world culture, because a lot of Americans, we've been brainwashed. My entire life, we've been brainwashed that we're the biggest, we're the best country in every way. You look at any statistic and you'll quickly realize that we have been brainwashed in a good way, to be proud of our country. But one of the things I noticed, the Netherlands, Bruges, Venice is the one people probably think of most. But there's lots of countries where water taxis are a very prevalent thing. And to me, having grown up in South Florida, we're surrounded by the ocean, but water taxis are not like as common a thing, except for in very, very small areas. We're getting to the top of the hour, and I wanted to finish up with a question that I'm really curious personally about. So it's a little bit of a selfish question, but I think also other people may be interested as well. What do you think is a perception of finance and accounting professionals that's out there that you disagree with?
The typical one is that maybe it resonates with me is the bean counter, is the person with the spectacles, and goes back. I had to watch it, the movie called The Accountant. I think it was based on a book.
Ah,
I'm not gonna ruin it for anyone, but if I will describe the main character, Ben Affleck, is that I know I have a long sleeve shirt on today, right, John, but normally I'd have short sleeves, probably with a pocket here, and they had a pen protector in the pocket. And then the spectacles. I'm not wearing glasses at the moment, so I'm not looking at any spreadsheets. We're having a conversation. But if I was looking at a spreadsheet, the glasses would probably go on. So there's that stereotypical image of an accountant, and it's just interesting that based on the conversations with I had on the podcast with people and whatever, and actually it's even a very male orientated perception. It's normally a guy wearing the spectacles and the short white
yeah,
shirt, whatever. There's a much better balance now between male female representation in finance and accounting.
yep.
There's a much higher standard than I know when I started. People are much more tech savvy. When I started, my first job in accounting and finance was in an accounts team at a shared services center, feeding in invoices into a file imaging and workflow system. It was a precursor to digitalization of finance, but I know or not. And I used to have to open envelopes with this thing called an envelope or letter opener. Now, if I
Hmm.
was to hold up that device, I don't have one here because I don't really open letters really anymore. But like I had a letter opener, I'm holding a pen now, and I held it up. There's a lot of people in finance wouldn't even know what that letter opener is nowadays. But
Yeah, it's
but there's
crazy.
a much better embracing of technology, and I think that's the bit that gets overlooked because I think now we can get to insights faster. I think we've people in finance and accounting now, and FP&A actually, who are much better at having conversations with business partners. Where I think we fall down sometimes is maybe a lack of consistency across us and having a standard operating system we can follow, because we're probably too guilty of fighting fires. And that's the bit I think we're still doing or could be doing better, is we're still very reactive. And people says it's easy for me maybe to say for it from my perspective, we should be more proactive. It's great to say it, but how do we become it? Well, I think it comes back to our early point. Is start measuring what matters, and measure what,
Yeah,
what gets measured gets managed. And it's measuring those right things and doing those right things rather than probably constantly fighting fires. I was talking to someone about one of their recent reviews in finance, like annual reviews, and I said, like, how did it go? And so, well, actually, it was very difficult to align on what the expectations were for the year. And I said, well, why? Because we were constantly fighting fires and they're always changing. And I said, well, what did you achieve during the year? Well, that was difficult too, because we were fighting fires so much. I was never really writing down what I was doing. So where's the learning? And if we don't maybe stop and take stock, which again, I remember doing year-end audits where you'd have to take stock. It's like maybe we need to maybe reinvest in some of our principles again, the boring stuff, to build those better operating systems. It's not sexy work anyway, and maybe that is it. So maybe it's unfair to have that unsexy image of the stereotypical accountant with the glasses and the pocket protector and the pens in the top pocket of the shirt, and the short sleeve shirt as well. But actually, sometimes that's what makes us strong, is the unsexy stuff, doing the basics well, because that's what builds sustainable business, focusing things. And with the way the economy is going in a lot of countries, potential recessions and blah blah blah, it's the basics that's going to see us through well, and that's what business is going to
yep,
be crying out for. But we have an edge now at the moment. We've got a much better balance, I think, much better cultural and combination, much better difference in ages as well. I think the strengths there. It now comes down to execution, and I think it comes back to doing the basics well.
yep.
So there is strength in that perception too.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I want to respect your time. We're at the top of the hour. How can people find out more about your software, your services, and how do they get in touch with you? It's their best way.
Yeah, I think so. So LinkedIn is the obvious one if it's on a personal connection level. I've a hey, it's a great thing about having a team is I have an assistant that picks up a lot of those messages, and we do get back to them. I would have been a bit slower over the last year getting back to those, but if you do send us a message on LinkedIn, I will get back. But if you're curious about the software, we have a website, avfww.com. It's just addedvaluefinanceworldwide.com. So that's what it's short for. But the Phonetic software pretty much takes over that platform. It is our main offering, along with some other services that we do and transformation programs and training and so on. But the main thing is the software. So you can go check us out there as well. And again, from a community give back perspective, it's a not-for-profit, to Strengthen the Numbers podcast, sitnshow.com. There's nearly 400 episodes of interviews on there. And thanks to the advances in technologies, a lot of them have been transcribed as well. So if you put a term into the search bar, you're looking to get some mentorship on of someone who knows more about finance, and definitely much more than I do, and probably what you do as well, John. We know our own little niches fairly well, but there's a lot more to finance than just us. Put in those search terms and give you up the episodes where they are and where in the episodes they come, or you can either read the answer or listen into the conversation. It's an evergreen resource, and some of these bits of advice are timeless.
And let's not forget an opportunity to meet you in person. You're going to be speaking at an event coming up, right?
Oh, that's right. Actually, yeah, I love helping out the community and showing up. So I think I'm hosting a panel with Generation CFO later in May. I've got a team who looks after all the social media, so I think it's late May. There's a session then.
Well, check out Andrew's LinkedIn for the details on that.
I'm embarrassed. I really should know these things.
That's fine.
I delegate.
That's the beauty of delegating and having a team, right? But my point with that was that's an opportunity to meet you in person, right? Which to me, if you look at a hierarchy of communication, in person, face to face is always going to be the best.
That's right. Yeah. So that's like a warm up event. So so that is a warm up event, and then I'm sort of committed to go over to the London event. I don't think we're up for an award this year, but Generation CFO knows to throw a good party, so I'll be there if anyone wants to catch up. Very
cool. All right, man. Well, I appreciate catching up. I appreciate your time. I would love to have you back on. I've still got loads of questions that I'd love to ask you, but we do have to wrap up here. So maybe I'll be able to get you back on for a future episode.
Hey, thanks for this opportunity, John, and wishing you all the success in your audience too. Have a hope I was able to share something useful today.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. We'll see you guys next time.